Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're covering the courtroom conclusion of one of the most emotionally charged and closely watched cases in recent Texas history, the state of Texas versus Adrien Gonzalez, where a jury delivered its verdict after weighing duty, responsibility, and the limits of criminal liability in the aftermath of an unimaginable school tragedy.
All right, your cause number 25 FC 0001U, the state of Texas versus Adrien Gonzalez. In each of the 29 counts, we, the jury, find the defendant, Adrien Gonzalez, not guilty. You see it? All right, members of the jury, I want to thank each and every one of you for your close attention and your patience and being with us timely throughout this trial. I know it was not easy for you. I know everybody was drafted. Nobody volunteered. It was a long endeavor, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I'm going to ask you one more time to go with the bailiff to the jury room, and we'll release you from back there. But thank each and every one of you, and would everyone rise for the jury to be excused. All right, Mr. Gonzalez, you were acquitted by the jury. Your lawyers could talk to you more about this, but you do have the opportunity within a timely manner to file for that expunction. They will tell you further about that, but it's incumbent on me to tell you that immediately after the verdict is returned. All right, we're in recess. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think you're probably very good. I'm going to tell them, folks, it's up to you if they're released from their instructions. I'm going to tell them that, and then I'll let them.
The monster who hurt those kids is dead. That monster is dead. And we told you from the beginning. And it is one of the worst things that ever happened. And I told you, the first time I stood up here and talked to you, I told you that you were not going to be the same person when you come out of this. And nor should you be. Nor should any of us witnessing horror, the tragedy, the loss. It's immeasurable. It's immeasurable. It's unthinkable. That loss is unthinkable. Their loss, it's unthinkable for any of us. You know, I told you guys that I have a 4-year-old and 1-year-old. And, you know, we told you we're from San Antonio. And obviously, you know, I want to go back and see them on the weekends after the first one. I went back. The first thing I did was my 4-year-old came downstairs and I hugged her. Right? And hugged her. And started crying. His hair, you know, trying to, so he doesn't see it. He said, "Are you sad, Daddy?" I said, "No, I'm happy. I'm holding you." Because I know what a privilege to, in this case.
The jury delivers its verdict. Adrien Gonzalez is found not guilty on all 29 counts. The judge thanks the jurors for enduring a long and difficult trial, formally acquits Gonzalez, and informs him of his right to seek an expunction before recessing the court. The moment is followed by a somber reflection on the unimaginable loss caused by the attack and how it forever changed everyone involved. In cases like this, can a courtroom verdict ever truly bring closure to such deep and lasting pain?
I know what a privilege it is to hold that child. I do. Right? I know. I can just imagine what it's like to not be able to do that. And I can imagine the pain, and I can imagine the anger. I can imagine wanting to put somebody in that chair because I can't put the monster that did that to my child in that chair. I can imagine that. And I can imagine putting pressure. And I can imagine them responding to the pressure. And I can imagine them putting him in that chair. Him and only him. In that chair. To try to pay for the pain. To try to somehow This could cover the immeasurable and the immense loss. And so after I saw him on Friday, we have to come back here that Sunday of the first week. And Gary, he comes and picks me up. That's kind of what we've been doing. So my son comes out and he says, "Are you going to go help that man?" That's what we told him was the reason I'm not there. He said, "Yeah, no, I'm going to go help that Adrien Gonzalez because he needs my help. He needs our help because they, the government, the power of the state, has decided that he has to pay for the failures of that day, for the mistakes that were made that day, and for all the pain that they did. And it's not right. Because the person that they plucked out and put in that chair, that person showed, we showed throughout this trial, that person was acting. He was acting. He was trying. And what I hear from the prosecutor, what I hear from the state, and what you've heard this entire time, what you've heard is that they will massage all the facts. They'll twist them all into a pretzel. That every one of these officers is fine. He's not. They'll twist it. Well, look who acted. They acted. Well, Adrien acted. Well, he didn't act the right way. They acted. Well, they didn't act the right way. Well, yeah, but he didn't act the right way, and he didn't know exactly what was going on, and he remained. Well, yeah, but Adrien remained in the hallway. Adrien remained in the hallway after he got shot at. Well, yeah, he remained in danger at that point, but before that point, he remained, and he didn't know what was going on. Every fact that they've tried to bring, they twisted it around. I'm going to show you. You're going to watch. I'm going to show you what they've done to twist this thing from the beginning to the end. But ultimately, what we're talking about is we're talking about duty, we're talking about burden, and all of those things. And I don't want one thing that I'm saying right now to make you believe that he doesn't believe that he has a duty to stop something that he knows is going on. Of course he does. He knows that. He was trying to do it. He started trying to do his duty. You look at some of these other people, no. They're not trying to do their duty. They're trying to stay back.
The speaker says the case was driven by unimaginable grief and a desire to hold someone accountable, even though the real attacker was already dead. He argues Adrien Gonzalez was unfairly placed in the defendant's chair to absorb the failures of that day, despite evidence showing he was trying to act and do his duty. When tragedy strikes, is blaming one officer a search for justice or a way to cope with unbearable loss?
And one of the things that the prosecutor said, he said, what you do here will tell law enforcement and give them how they respond. I'll tell you what, I agree with that, but not in the way that he's saying it. Because the way he wants you to believe it is what your verdict says is that next time these officers will make the right choice, the right decision. They will respond appropriately. They will be perfect. But the problem is that the issues here are not that Adrien failed to respond. They're not that he was intending not to engage. So you're not going to fix any of that. Because I'll tell you, and I kind of hope it never happens again. I think we all know that it probably will. But those officers, what your verdict says is not going to make them perfect the next time. It's not going to make them not make mistakes. It's not going to make them not interpret things differently, strangely, weirdly, based on their own experiences. That's not what it's going to do. I'll tell you what it would do. If you convict them, they're all going to be Randy Hill on that perimeter. There's nobody going in. What did he do? He went in. You convict him. What does it tell police officers? It's going to tell them, I'm not getting in that crap. I'm not getting in that chair. If I see somebody running towards the school, I'm not going after them, because if I'm mistaken and it takes me to the other side of the building from where the shooter is, and then I can't understand or know where the shooter is, I can go to prison and get prosecuted. So what you tell police officers is don't go in, don't react, don't respond, stay on the perimeter, because Randy Hill isn't sitting in that chair. He's not. Adrien Gonzalez is here. Randy Hill is not. None of those officers are in that chair. That's what you're going to tell them. You're going to tell them, don't do it. And you can't tell them that. I agree with them. You can't tell them that. We cannot have law enforcement feel that way. Feel like if they're not perfect, if they don't make a perfect decision. And that's what they do. And the family goes right there. There's nothing that's going to bring these kids back. There's nothing ever is going to solve that pain. Nothing. Not that. Because one of the things that Bill said to you is he said, those kids deserve to be remembered, and they do. But you do not honor their memory by doing injustice in their name. You don't. That does not honor those children. By doing an injustice, by doing what they want you to do, by letting him massage the facts, by letting the pretzel go all the way around and miss everybody else, but keeps going right back to him, because that's what they need. We talk about the charge. If I can get it up. The duty. So remember this about what the court has read to you. And remember, I'm not saying he doesn't have a duty. Of course he does. But just like every officer, just like the officers in San Antonio, they all had the duty. But that's, and it may have sounded flippant when we compared it. We said, look, you're in San Antonio. You hear there's a school shooting, right? You didn't stop it. Well, no, because it's not happening in the present. And the reason we're asking that question is because the law is specific about it. A person, they have a duty to prevent an offense against a person about to be committed in his presence. So the first thing you have to figure out is that in his presence? You know, and the judge told you, you know, use common meanings, but he is here, and he never, right? They're not even disputing. He never saw the shooter, ever. He is never in the presence of the shooter. Now, what Bill may say is, well, he didn't go to the presence. But that's not what this law says. Law doesn't say you have to go and find yourself and make yourself be in the presence. And I'm not trying to make any excuse about that. But the law is the law is the law. This isn't about you have to go seek it out and make it happen in your presence. The law is saying if it's happening right there, there's a duty. Of course there is. He was doing his duty. He was running to the danger. He was driving right in there. If that was the gunman, and God, I wish it was, he would have ran right over.
The defense argues that convicting Adrien Gonzalez wouldn't make police responses better. It would make officers more hesitant. They say the issue wasn't a refusal to act, but imperfect decision-making under chaos, and punishing that sends a message to officers to stay back and avoid risk to protect themselves. The law, they argue, requires a duty only when a crime is happening in an officer's presence, and Gonzalez never saw the shooter. Still, he was moving toward danger trying to act. Does justice mean demanding perfection in moments of chaos, or applying the law as it's written?
That's what he was doing. He's going 50 miles an hour at that person. Now, what I'm glad is he didn't run the person over because he realized no, he flies. He realized it's a coach is what he thought. Teacher's aide. But he realized who it was. After it's already too late, but he's here. And from this point, that shooter is never in his presence. Ever. There's never a time. The only time that he gets close is when he goes one of the first 5 people to go up that hallway. That is a hallway of death. Anyone going into that hallway knows. Anyone knows. Any police officer knows that those rifle rounds start coming that way as they're coming up the hallway. It's death. They don't have any equipment. They don't have anything to block it. It's death. He went in that hallway to death. See, and I thought about it because, you know, there's no way I can tell you about how they feel. But I thought about it as a parent. As a parent with kids there, if I knew that while my kid was in that classroom, somebody was going up that hallway, risking death to try to get to him, I'd appreciate it. I would. I mean, they're not perfect. But the person who did it, the monster, is dead. But he went up. A lot of people there didn't. A lot of people didn't enter that building until the room was surrounded on all sides by officers with rifles. Not one person on the side that he went in had one. Not one person had an AR. Not one person had a rifle. And they went in. Donald Page went in. Coronado went in. Chief Arredondo went in. People all went in and risked certain death. And the only time that he could have even been close to being in the presence of the shooter is when the shooter shot at him and Page to the wall. And you heard that testimony that there's gunshots going through the wall that they have to back up because not only can they not get to the door at all, they cannot get to the door. Joe Vasquez told you, that door, you're going to die at the door. You will die at the door. And I know that what the prosecution's saying is you should. Your job is to die at the door. But there was a lot of people out there. And if that's the training, die at the door, then everybody out there didn't follow. Everybody out there waited until there was shield. Everybody out there, Joe Vasquez included. Everybody. And you remember what Joe said? He said, thought his daughter could be in there, and he still waits 50 minutes for shields, for a plan, for board tack. So that's what I'm saying. They're twisting it around, and they're saying, well, his job, every shot was noticed that Adrien had to go in and be the person to die at the door, to be the person that tried to breach, solo entry with nothing. But nobody else did that. So is that the training? Right? Like that's one of the things that you have the right to go, because that's count 2, disregarding his training. Is that the training? Because if that is the training, and all these officers have been trained, and not one of them does it, but only one of them sits there, right? Like you have to twist it every time. For every fact has to be twisted around. That no other officer, I'm assuming, they made a point. Everybody's trained an active shooter. But that's why we pointed out that, well, now it's become a barricaded subject. And that training's different than active shooter. Now, some people are treating it like a hostage situation. And that's different than active shooter. And so the point is with this training was never meant to be twisted and used like this.
The defense argues that Adrien Gonzalez did move toward danger, at one point driving fast toward who he believed might be the shooter, but realized it was a coach just in time. They emphasize that the shooter was never actually in his presence, and that entering the hallway without rifles or shields meant near certain death, something many officers delayed until proper equipment arrived. Their point is that expecting Gonzalez to die at the door alone wasn't realistic training, especially when no other officer did the same, and that the prosecution unfairly twisted active shooter training to fit this case.
You think that anybody that's putting on police training is going, yeah, and if you don't follow this, you're going to prison? That's not what they're doing. They're trying to give the best possible tactics and strategies to get to the best possible outcome. That's the point. But go back to the duty. If you find right there, honestly, he was never in the shooter's presence. Never was in his presence. Because that law, do not let them argue that law means that he has to go put himself in the presence. That law says it has to be in his presence. That's what that says. And if that's there, and you say that wasn't in his presence, then it doesn't apply. Under 605, he has the duty to prevent the threat, to do injury, if within his power. So they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that it's within his power. Because what they're not talking about is, no, this is saying you have the duty to go and follow the gunfire. That's not what this says. It doesn't say you have a duty to follow the gunfire. What it says is if it's within his power. So all of the officers before the breach, all the officers that I don't have anything bad to say about Joe Vasquez. That man went in. He went in there and he was willing to put his life on the line. But going in there like that in that room, it's not a whole lot different than going up that hallway, the first people to go up there without any protection, without any rifle rated anything, without any fire, without any rifles, without anything. But what that's telling you is that the reason that they waited is because it was within none of their power to get in that room. It was within none of their power to do that. It was not within his power to get in there and stop it, and it was not within any of those other guys until they got the right foot. And then they went in, and it was within their power. But if they haven't proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Adrien could have done something to prevent, if beyond a reasonable doubt, then that doesn't apply. And then, of course, the education coach says he protects the safety and welfare of people in his jurisdiction. Well, of course. But that's not a duty. I don't even understand why it's there. It's not a duty to say, well, yes, and if you violate it, you go to prison. If you violate it, you're a convicted felon. If you violate it, you're going to be on trial. That's just telling police officers, and especially those who work at schools, that your duty is to do that. Of course it is. That's your job. Of course it is. But what we're talking about is we're talking about a man who is trying to do that. He is not trying to do that. He's not going, I'm not protecting anybody. Shooter. and then drive off the other way. He doesn't drive around the building. He doesn't drive away from the gunfire. He's still trying to figure this out because we're talking about 1 minute and 48 seconds under their indictment. They keep saying 3 minutes, but it's 1 minute and 48 seconds. I showed you this in board hour. When we talk about beyond a reasonable doubt, possibly, probably, guilt likely, strong belief. If you have a strong belief that he had a duty, it's not guilty. Right there. That's why I'm talking about duty first, because as the prosecutor explained, if there's not a duty, then there's not. And not one of this is to be interpreted as me saying that he doesn't have a duty. We all have a duty to each other. And he's a police officer, and he's going to do what he can. But when we're talking about criminal charges, if you even have to, well, it's likely that he does have that duty. It's likely that it was within his power. It's likely that it was within his presence.
The defense argues that Adrien Gonzalez never actually had the shooter in his presence, which is what the law requires to establish a duty. Officers are trained to respond safely, not to act perfectly under threat of prosecution. Gonzalez was trying to protect people, but it wasn't within his power to stop the shooter until proper equipment and backup arrived. The key point: if it can't be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he could have prevented the threat, the duty doesn't apply, and the criminal charges cannot hold.
I have a strong belief it was in his presence. I have a strong belief that it was within his power. That's not guilty. It's a verdict of not guilty right there. That's the first consideration. But going to the indictment, after hearing gunshots and after being advised of the general location of the shooter, and Nico's going to talk to you a lot more about this, it's convenient the way they're twisting it. It's convenient the way they're saying, well, of course, he was advised. She told him, 1, 2, 3, and told him exactly where it was, and she pointed over, she's over here, pointed over there, and he knew. That's how they're presenting it to you. But that's not how we know that that's not how it happened. We know, we have to know, because she is frantic. She is very unclear about a lot of things. And so if you have a reasonable doubt that he was advised of the general location of the shooter, that's not guilty. If you have a reasonable doubt that he had time to respond to the shooter. Clicker slow on the uptake. Right. Having time to respond to the shooter. If you have a reasonable doubt as to that, it's not guilty. All right. Because what we established, even now when he's reading Adrien's statement, shots fired, or she told me where it was, shots fired, I radioed it out. He's compressing time in his interview. We're going to talk about that. He's compressing that time. The way he's telling it, she tells him, and then he communicates it on the radio. We know that that's not what happened. We know that from the time of shots fired to the time he communicates it on the radio is a longer period of time, which is accounted for by the fact that he is trying to get the information out of her. Once he does, he communicates it. Once he communicates it, we told you, it's a second after this monster's already gotten in. It's not an unlocked door, but it's already gotten in that door. When he communicates this out, the guy's already there. So having time to respond. Once he finally figures out what it is, does he have time to respond? And if he does respond, we were showing you, if he does respond over here, he's responding to something that's not even there anymore. He's doing basically what Coronado does, which is go completely away from where they saw him go in and go all the way around the building. So if there's a reasonable doubt as to having time to respond, that's not guilty. Any reasonable doubt as to any of these things, these are all elements that they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And if there's any reasonable doubt as to any of these things, if there's a reasonable doubt as to Melody Flores and what she said, that doesn't say anything about her. That woman was traumatized. Of course she's going to be confused. Of course she's going to say it's a handgun when it's a rifle. Of course she's going to describe a completely different police car. Of course she's going to do this because she's traumatized. But the reason we point those things out is they want him to be perfect, but they have to be perfect. They have to convince you perfectly, almost, beyond a reasonable doubt of their evidence. And that evidence rests on what did Melody Flores say and when did she say it? And they did not prove that. They did not prove it because even when she testified, Nico's going to go over it, she agreed that she was not just saying clearly, hi, this is what's happening, but this is where it is. She was saying a lot of it. And it goes back to that chart. Anywhere you are, if you're suspected, if he's possibly guilty, if he's probably guilty, I told you at Bordier, I mean, most people get convicted at that probably because jurors go, well, they're probably guilty, so they convict them. But that's not what the standard is. That's not what the law says. The law says it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the only way that our Constitution works. It's the only way our system of justice works. Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about Ranger Hill. Look at this. I froze it. This animation right there. Right at the point that Adrien's passing that spot. And that's where he has the shooter. He says it's approximate. Well, guess what? Approximate's not beyond a reasonable doubt. Their whole case is based on approximate guesses, speculation. We don't know. We're just really mad and we're upset that we have to put somebody here. Somebody's got to go in that chair because the guy who actually did this thing, the monster who did this, cannot go in that chair. He's dead. And good riddance.
The defense argues that even a strong belief isn't enough for conviction. The law requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. If there's doubt about whether Adrien Gonzalez was clearly told the shooter's location, had enough time to respond, or could realistically act before the gunman entered the building, the verdict must be not guilty. The evidence, they say, relies on confusion, compressed timelines, and approximations from a traumatized witness, not clear certainty. And when a case is built on guesses rather than proof, the law does not allow a conviction.
Good riddance. The devastation and the destruction he causes, unlike almost anything that has happened to us as a country, as a people, and definitely in the state of Texas. The devastation that he caused, children that young and that many, good riddance. But that's not him. But they have to have somebody. So what do? They give you an animation that looks like that. Which, as we know, we had to bring a witness. We had to bring Claudia to tell you and to show you. Look, you'll see him. He's walking right there. And you see him walking in between those cars, and he stays there. Now, in a few seconds, you're going to see Adrien's car drive by. His head kind of popped down when it happens. He's going right there. You see the white car is flashing right through. That's Adrien driving by him between the cars. So what would an honest rendition of what you just saw, what Claudia testified, what does an honest rendition of that look like? It looks like that. That's what that animation should have looked like. Because we have actual proof. And Ranger Hill can't act like he didn't know that existed. He told you about the puff of smoke. That's the same video he's looking at. He knows that this guy's between the cars. But he told y'all, they sponsored it, that he was here. Why are they doing that? Because they're willing to twist things. They're willing to twist things for you guys in order for you to do their bidding. But those kids aren't honored by an injustice in their name. It's not honored by a conviction in their name.
And first, the window went down to the 111. Maybe for it, no other may be involved in doing it. He sees the shot come through the window. Adrien Gonzalez tells the police the shot go through the window. Adrien Gonzalez gets on the radio and says, "Guys, I think he's made it in the building."
See, that's what they told you at the beginning. They told you that Adrien Gonzalez got on the radio and said, "Guys, I think he's made it in the building." Why are they telling you that? Because they want you to believe that he had that knowledge early, that he knew that he was in the building. What else did he say? In the opening statement to you, that Melody Flores saw the gunshot go through the window. When she testified, she said, "I didn't see that." Why is it important? It's because Coronado radio, we've talked about it. And I feel like it keeps going into a memory hole every time it goes back over here. Right here, Coronado says, "Guys, I think he made it in the building." He established that. He said, he's the guy on the radio. He's the guy that thinks. Even Ranger Hill said, Coronado is the one who said that. Why did he say that? Because these three saw him do it. Because these three had line of sight. And he's radioing that around. And one thing we were clear to point out is that a gunshot did go off at the exact same time as that transmission. Why is that important? Because we don't know who heard that or who didn't. We don't know who heard Coronado go out and say that he's in the building. But we know that Coronado knew that or said that.
The defense emphasizes that the shooter is dead and responsible for unimaginable devastation, but argues the state still needed someone else to blame. They point to an animation they say was misleading, contrasting it with video evidence and witness testimony showing the shooter clearly visible between parked cars as Adrien Gonzalez drove past. According to the defense, this proves investigators distorted the visuals despite knowing better. They also stress that it was Officer Coronado, not Gonzalez, who first radioed that the shooter had entered the building after witnesses with a clear line of sight saw it happen. The timing of gunfire and radio traffic, they argue, creates uncertainty about who heard what and when, reinforcing reasonable doubt rather than proof.
And so that's the knowledge he has when he's driving around. Why is that important? Because prosecution, what have they tried to make you think? Coronado knew immediately that the gunfire was coming from the building. Coronado knew immediately that. Look at Coronado. He knew it immediately. Of course he did. He saw him move the building on the side. He knew it from here. Once he came around here.
So that's not admitted into evidence. There's no evidence that Coronado saw the shooter. There's no testimony about it, anything like that. So now he's misstating facts to the jury.
Okay, once again, ladies and gentlemen, what the lawyers say is not evidence. If the evidence, based upon your recollection, differs, rely on your own. You may proceed.
Well, and I can understand why they're trying to fight against that. Because, look, this is, what I'm saying is we know that he radioed. I think he's in the building. When he's on this side of the building going to the other side. We know why. He testified. I thought he was going through the building, which implies that he knows that he went in to the building. But they keep fighting against that because this, knowing that he's gone into the building on this side, all their training, what does it say? Go to the gunfire. Even Ranger Hill they're twisting everything. They're twisting it all around. Ranger Hill said, well, yes, going to the gunfire is going all the way around here to the other side of the building, from where you saw him enter and from where you heard and saw him shooting into the building. So that to them is going to the gunfire. That to them is following their training. Exactly how they're supposed to. That to them is working to distract, delay, all the things they've charged him with. Well, they're not charged because they did that. Even though they watched this happen. Had to have. And then Mike Whitskill. Now, I thought this was interesting. Mike Whitskill, I mean, he's an interesting guy. He said, I'm here as an expert witness in training, right? He didn't have any opinion. And this is the interesting thing. The state had every opportunity to have Mike Whitskill go, I trained this guy. I've seen all this stuff that you've given. But I reviewed all of these things. And Adrien Gonzalez did not follow the training that I had. They had every opportunity to do that. And they didn't. They didn't ask him. He said, I didn't review anything. I don't have any opinion about whether or not Adrien Gonzalez followed his training. In fact, you don't have any opinion at all. You don't have any real statement from anybody about whether or not he followed his training. And the things that you have from the officers are always with a caveat. Yes, you run to the gunfire if you know where it's coming from. If you don't know where it's coming from, you take cover and assess until you know where it is coming from. That's the first thing. You run towards the gunfire if you know where it's coming from. You look at their active shooter trainings. All the active shooter trainings involve them seeing the shooter and then going after the shooter, which makes sense. But they are prosecuting a person that they will have to admit, and they have admitted, and they've stipulated and never contested that Adrien never saw the shooter. I mean, he talked about the death by PowerPoint. In Adrien's 40-hour class that they were talking about, the 40-hour class he took, he said, look, we do 75-25, the practical versus the death by PowerPoint. I'll point out that, and you'll see that in the training that the prosecution mentioned about, well, Adrien taught a training. He facilitated a training. He did. There was somebody else who wrote the materials. There was somebody else who did it. And that's really what they kind of do. They have to facilitate for each other so that they can get their training out. But in these trainings that are happening, in the trainings that are going on, all of the trainings are training them to come in, have a rifle, come in, go in and be prepared to come in and do those things, and mainly to come in and see the shooter. Mainly to come in and know where the shots and the shooter is happening.
The defense says the prosecution misrepresents what Gonzalez and other officers knew. No one saw the shooter clearly, and Gonzalez never violated his training. The state's own expert admitted he had no opinion on Gonzalez's actions. Officers only go toward gunfire if they know its source, which Gonzalez never did, so the charges misapply the law and training.
And what they have done is they have just said, well, we don't care. Yeah, he said he didn't know where the shooter was. We don't believe him. We believe everybody else. Everybody else gets a pass. Everybody else. Randy Hill gets a pass. Saucedo gets a pass. Well, yeah. Saucedo said, I think I see him, permission to shoot. Well, we don't believe he said that. Or if he did say that, he had kids behind him, so he shouldn't shoot. That's crazy. That's crazy. Talking about this backdrop, that's crazy. And if that's the case, these officers are being overtrained on backdrop, because you do not fail to shoot a mass murderer of children because there's a backdrop where you could potentially shoot a child. You don't do that. You have to take that shot. And so if that's what they're saying, well, no, Saucedo has a reason why, because there's this backdrop. But then we pointed out, well, if Adrien did what they were asking him to do and came around here, we know now that by the time he transmitted, the guy's in the school, so he would have come around, nobody would be there. But even if he came around and somebody was there, shooting back here that's his backdrop too. But no, not for him. No excuse we make for every other person there applies to him. And I think that there's something fundamental in each one of us. I think it's fundamental in each one of you that that's not fair. I think it's fundamental that that's not how justice is supposed to be done. It's not. It is not fair. It's not how justice is done, that they can do that and interpret every fact against him before everybody else, similarly situated or better situated. He agrees it takes 10,000 hours of practice to reach expertise. I mean, these are not experts. Adrien is not a SWAT expert. He is not an active shooter expert, right? He is doing the best he can. And this was obviously the worst situation of his or any of their law enforcement lives. 5 minutes to dress like one, 5 years to be one. I mean, the training is so extensive, and it's much, much more than Mike Whitsville gave 40 hours on that day. And then they talk about, well, you stop the killing, stop the dying. They never tell you how in these trainings. They never say how. They never say, how do you do it how do you do it if it's just you and a gun and they have a rifle and you're in an open field? They don't say how. They just say, do it. Go in, win the game. Now, this is what in his instructor course, CME does not endorse nor encourage going it alone. See, what I'm saying is that these are sending mixed messages to the people who are being trained. They're reading this. They're seeing it. And then when you're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt on count 2, did he follow his training? It's like, even in the training, they're telling you, well, you should go in, but we don't endorse, we don't encourage it. Because having greater numbers significantly improves a first responder's odds for success. Now, what does that mean, odds for success? Because what they keep saying is that there's a continuum of life scale, and there's a priority of life scale, right? And then proof success. This is not saying odds for success meaning odds that I stay alive as an officer. Odds for success in being able to protect civilians. Odds for success in being able to actually do this. Because if you try to just run in and you don't have any of that shooter, remember the shield comes in when they finally came in, pop, 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 he's putting it right on the shield. The guy in the back of the stick, he comes in, shot in the head. That guy was ready. And anybody who approached that door was dead at the door. They were dead at that door. So what they're saying is the numbers improve the first responders' odds for success in saving lives, because a dead police officer is protecting no one.
The defense argues the state unfairly excuses other officers while blaming Gonzalez, twisting the facts against him alone. They say his training gave mixed messages, telling officers to stop the killing but not how to do it safely or alone, and even warned against solo engagement. Gonzalez wasn't a SWAT expert and lacked equipment, while the shooter was heavily armed, meaning rushing in alone would likely have failed and cost more lives. The core point is fairness. Holding Gonzalez criminally responsible ignores the realities of training, risk, and what was realistically within his power at that moment.
That's what his training says. That's the person they brought you to say what his training was. That's what the training says. So they're sending mixed messages to these officers, and then if you better read the mixed message the right way, or the way they want you to read it, otherwise you're in this chair. It's not right. You saw the training pictures. This is how they're training to respond to active shooter. You got two people, you got rifles, they're coming in together, they're coming in different ways. That's how they're training. But that's not how it was. And we said in those hundreds of pictures, they didn't bring you one picture where they're coming in with all they got is a gun. All they got are a handgun. Not one in the hundreds that they took at that training, because they're training these officers to have the right equipment. Adrien didn't, because the school district didn't buy it. Bailouts. We talked about it. Why is it important? Because everybody is responding strangely to this thing because of this rat. They all think they're going, well, it's okay that Coronado and them thought, well, this guy's running through the school because it's a bailout. He's just trying to get away from us. But it's not okay that Adrien thought that that could happen. It's not okay that Adrien's standing here going, well, these guys are here and I'm here and I don't know where these shots are coming from, but he's probably trying to go here. I still have a whole school down here. It's not okay if Adrien thought bailout, no, he didn't follow his training. What Adrien said, he cooperated every time. Remember, this is a day later, and you know he's experiencing time compression. You know he's doing that because he's saying, I hear the shots. She's telling me I radio it out. That's not how it happened. So he's going through the same problems that we've talked about in all the other witnesses having to recount and recall what happened. He's having that same issue. He drove to the danger, and Nick will talk more about it. And then hindsight bias. And here's the thing that they keep trying to get him on. They go, because hindsight bias for Adrien is when he's telling the story about what happened, he says, yes, it was a female. It was a coach, because he now knows that that's the truth. At the time, though, he did not know that. At the time, he didn't think it was a woman. He thought it was the shooter at the time. But when he's telling the story, he's now telling it in a way, using the knowledge that he has, and he's explaining the story. And the same thing goes for when he's talking about what Melody Flores told him. When he's talking about what he understood, he did eventually understand what she was communicating and communicated it out. But in hindsight bias, he's not going through with the ranger, and the ranger's not asking, was she clear about it? Did you know beyond a reasonable doubt when you got out of the car that she said that he's over there and you knew exactly where it was? He didn't follow up with any of that. So what Adrien's doing at the time of interview is he's skipping all that stuff. And he's getting to, I figured out what she was trying to say, and I communicated it down on the radio. He skipped it all because nobody's asking. Because when they interviewed him, they're not prosecuting him. They don't think he did anything wrong. Nobody does. Nobody does. So years later, after all of this, they had somebody's got to go in that chair. So ultimately, it's the same thing I said from the beginning. You know, I told my kid, and so I'm here, I'm helping this man. But I can't be the only one, and Nico can't be the only one, and Gary can't be the only one who needs your help too. Y'all are all citizens, and he needs you. He needs you to look at these facts as you have. Y'all have been very attentive, and y'all have to see very horrible, and hear horrible things. A lot of those things didn't have anything to do with those 3 minutes. Why did they bring that? You know why they brought it. You know why they tried to do it. The horror would make you so angry with him. But you convicted. They played on your emotions. They presented all that in front of them. They're trying to do all of that, but they're not really going to what Adrien was experiencing and thinking and feeling on that day. But the one thing you do know, he went up that hallway. The one thing you do know, he went after somebody he thought was the gunman. That man didn't just stand by. He acted, except they just ignore all of his actions because they're trying to pretzel it, massage it, get it in there, do anything that they can to get the conviction. It's the most horrible thing, one of the most horrible things ever. One of the most horrible things that's ever happened in this state. But those kids are not served. The memory of those children that I agree should be honored was not honored by an injustice in their name. It's not. And so we're asking you to find them that girl.
Adrien Gonzalez acted bravely during the school shooting, navigating extreme danger with limited information and equipment, while the prosecution twisted facts and applied hindsight to unfairly target him. Evidence shows he followed his training, went toward the threat, and communicated effectively under chaotic conditions, while other officers in similar situations received leniency. Any reasonable doubt about his presence, knowledge, or ability to act supports a verdict of not guilty, highlighting the complexity of split-second decisions in life-threatening situations. Overall, Adrien was unjustly blamed for actions taken under impossible circumstances, while the real threat had already been neutralized, and this case underscores the importance of judging actions based on facts, courage, and context to ensure justice honors both victims and those who act to protect them. Thanks for watching, and for more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments.